I'm a neurologist, brain doctor, and because of my concern for what was happening to the patients I was seeing, the kids I was seeing, in terms of their stress levels, I felt that there were things that I knew from neuroscience that could be helpful to the experiences they were having and their teachers were having. So rather than just be somebody telling someone what to do, I went back to school, got my teaching credential and master's, and taught in classrooms in primary and secondary school to see how the neuroscience could apply. So let's start with this one, stress. Stress can block access to learning and empathy. So I'll give you an example of some research. In this particular study, people were shown a photograph of two identical dolphins, and yet they found differences. And indeed, the more differences they found, the higher their physiologic evidence of stress. Do you see any differences? Yes. Okay, so let's see what this means. First of all, now that we've had some humor, I want to let you know that there will be slides out of my empathy for you that you've been enjoying two incredibly powerful presentations and the opening ceremonies. I'm going to keep this to the required 15 minutes. Therefore, there will be slides that say moving on, and they'll also say available in your PowerPoint. So the PowerPoint with the details on each slide will be available to you, and indeed, if you have any trouble accessing it, there's my email address. Just send me an email, and I'll send it to you. In addition, I'll send you lots of practical interventions, which we won't have enough time to go into every specialty, every subject, every grade level. Send me a request, and I'll send you all the links to my articles, etc., and the PowerPoint. Okay, so don't be frustrated when it says moving on. It's out of my for you. Okay, so how does information become knowledge? How does that relate to empathy? Here's like a quick map. Information comes in low brain area and attention filter. If it gets in through this attention filter, it has to pass through an emotional filter called the amygdala. If it's going to do two things, if it's going to get to the prefrontal cortex, where long-term memories are constructed, and especially the prefrontal cortex, where the executive functions, including empathy, are developing, they need to pass through the amygdala to tell the rest of the brain what to do. Let's see that in more detail. So here's a brain without high stress. It's a diagram, but it's the same information. That attention filter, that emotional switching station, the amygdala, and then there's that prefrontal cortex, that great place where we need to get to for memory and we need to get from for emotional self-management, including empathy. So if there's not high stress, nice information can travel through the amygdala and make it up and down from that prefrontal cortex. However, if stress levels are high, we get problems. When the amygdala is in a high stress state, we can see it on neuroimaging as increased metabolic activity, more oxygen use, more glucose. And when that happens, we see other changes in the brain. We see that there's a decrease in the amount of information that gets up to the prefrontal cortex, where it needs to get to become long-term memory. And sadly, we also see a blockage or reduction in the top-down flow of those executive functions that allow us to reflect instead of just react. That's with high stress. So clearly, we want to avoid that. What are some evidences that we sadly do see? Well, starts with animals in the wild. It's actually reasonable and protective that in a high stress state, when their amygdala notices and gets into that block state, the low brain is in charge. That's actually a good thing for an animal in the wild. They'll react, not reflect. They'll quickly go into fight, flight, freeze. That'll be good for their survival. Yet that same system is what's operating in our learners, our students, ourselves. Instead of seeing the actual fight, flight, freeze, we're seeing the human equivalents of acting out or zoning out. We need to, therefore, consider how to reduce that emotional filter blockade, how to resist or reduce that red light in the amygdala. And that's what you will see on this moving on slide in detail on the next. This slide talks about what climate, what empathetic responses, and how to build their executive functions. Now, don't get anxious because I promise you I'm skipping these because you're going to learn something really cool and hopefully new-ish. Okay, so these executive functions, these top-down controls that let us and children even more resist reactive and go into thinking about before they act. Those executive functions, including empathy, are not there when kids are born. They are born with the executive skills or functions for emotional self-awareness, control, empathy, but they are born with the potential to develop them. And that is where we come in. So going back to the prefrontal cortex, where the executive functions are developing at a particularly high rate during childhood, we can do something to make them stronger, make them develop more significantly, especially as they need them more and earlier now. So that process of us helping them build their top-down control of emotions will require intervention. So when you hear about executive functions in the prefrontal cortex that are growing, they include things that we talked about: emotional self-awareness. How am I feeling now? Emotional self-regulation. Okay, I know I'm stressed. What do I do about it? In addition, other executive functions that all come into empathy: judgment, prioritizing, thoughtful decision making. All of those significant executive functions are combined to promote empathy. Let's see how to do that. Neuroplasticity, no doubt a word that you've heard and have varying degrees of familiarity with, and it's so important for students to show our understanding of what they're going through and what their potential is, for them to understand the power of their brains and neuroplasticity. Because indeed, all experiences, all interactions shape the brain. You wake up a new brain each morning. What your brain was doing in the past doesn't dictate what your future will be, because we can change the neural networks through the brain's own process of neuroplasticity. So, as I'll show you briefly in the next slide, the process of learning, including understanding their own emotional experiences and those of others, involves a continual remodeling, restructuring, rerouting of the brain. Let's see. You may have heard the phrase, more firing, more wiring. Well, let's go a little deeper. Neuroplasticity, firing equals wiring. What does that specifically refer to? The brain has neurons. They're useless unless they're connected, because it takes dozens, if not hundreds, of connected neurons to even hold the information about what you would call one of the fingers on your hand. So this particular phrase, more firing, more wiring, refers to neuroplasticity. The brain has it ready to go. The more one activates a circuit, a memory, a behavior, an insight, the more that circuit of neurons connected to each other by connections, dendrites, axons. But the more that circuit is used, activated, that means it will get stronger. doesn't require anything other than using it. So that's why more firing, more electric activity through the circuit will build more dendrites, more myelin over the axon. It will be there. They need to know it will be there through repetition. So obviously, or not so obviously, but the care and feeding, the building of their executive functions is to incorporate the activation of these circuits from prioritizing judgment, thoughtful decision making, empathy, to allow them opportunities to build them by incorporating them through online or in-person experiences, because it's what will make them stronger. And they shouldn't be separate, incorporated. So we want to help our learners build these executive functions, such as self-regulation and empathy, by the opportunity to activate and use them. This is another moving on because it describes specifically ways for you to promote their top-down awareness, their thoughtful consideration of how they're feeling. And as you'll see on the next one, there'll be ways that you can help guide them into not only recognizing their feelings and emotions, but having the power to intervene. Okay, I'm getting stressed. What things have I practiced and learned that I can activate? And this is also true for the learning challenges we have in terms of remote learning, the social isolation, the loss of face-to-face, and gosh, empathy, the fact that we don't have the face-to-face visual and emotional cues that we have in the classroom, nor do they have the emotional support when they look at us with concern, with celebration. We're not seeing it their eyes. So that's hard on all of us, and something to really acknowledge to them and with them and how they feel about it. It always helps to describe how does it feel not to have done that, and what else can we do about it. So as you'll see, things like interactive journaling and others on this slide can help, not cure it, but help the awareness of recognition of the fact that, yes, it's not the same, but let's do our best. And as you'll see in this one on your PowerPoint, how we can help them by modeling our empathy, modeling our anxiety and our stress and how it's affecting us, and opportunities for guided play and homework online or in person that will help them build their skills as they're building empathy. Now, here's what I was saving up for, because it may be something you're not as familiar with. So let's look at cognitive flexibility. It is indeed one of the executive functions developing in their prefrontal cortex. Let's take a look at it. Look at this slide and look at it carefully. Think to yourself, how many red dots do you see? Give you some time. Okay. Oops. 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to take that back. Let's say I only saw that particular one. 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It may have cut off, but here's my recommendation or insight. Here's my question to you. Did you see anything else besides the 5? Forget the 6. Did you notice anything else? Was there anything else that you were aware of, such as 6 fingers on each hand? Now, this is an illustration of it, but the point of it is cognitive flexibility for empathy. When we see the 5 dots and aren't really aware or cognizant of the 6 fingers on each hand, that's called inattentional blindness. And I'll read this. Attention restricted to the designated task, causing one to fail to notice things in plain sight. This has so many ramifications, one of which is students' expectations of a single right, correct solution or interpretation. That's so problematic because if they don't have cognitive flexibility, opportunities to see more beyond the specific question, the will be the ones that we also are seeing now. Cognitive flexibility, when you help them build it, helps them consider more than one solution, more creative solutions, more than one answer, to reflect on more than one opinion, not just the one they hear spouted by someone. It also is the ability for them to resist automatic responses, which lead to or are responsible for bias, stereotypes, limited perspectives. They need to have the cognitive flexibility to think, okay, but what else? Cognitive flexibility is a tool for much more beyond empathy or including empathy, abilities to collaborate, to communicate globally, to be able to take what they've learned and apply it to new situations, or when facts change, to adapt to that, to innovate, to create, and to have the opening in their neural networks for empathy beyond immediate reactive response. And a few opportunities to build cognitive flexibility throughout instruction, not as an aside, is while learning something, consider it or write about it from a variety of perspectives and other things that you'll see in this moving on. But I want to go to the last two to remind us, oh, gosh, I wish I would have done this more, but more wait time. Asking a question and saying, don't raise your hands right away, or don't write it in right away. Wait until I say the name of a vegetable before you do that. Wait time so they can reflect, and avoiding language that suggests a single answer, like when I said how many dots and we didn't see the 6 fingers. So rather than saying what is the answer, what is answer? What are some answers? Empathy boosters. To conclude, I want to acknowledge everything you're doing is challenging and equally rewarding. You have to be optimistic to be in education. And I'm optimistic that you're here at the conference and that you're in education. And I feel that these kids are in very capable hands. And indeed, your efforts that will indeed build their neural networks of executive functions, such as empathy, will increase their abilities beyond the classroom. It'll increase their abilities to care for themselves and care for others. Your students, these students, will be more able to embrace the challenges, big challenges that lie ahead, and they'll be able to do so collaboratively, responsively, and joyfully. And I'm so grateful for you. So as a little summary of what neuroplasticity is, from Oliver Wendell Holmes, a brain stretched to new limits never regains its original shape. So you are the brain shapers. You are the power that allows them to reach their highest potentials. And I thank you so much for that.